Good.
Good morning. Thank you all for joining our Front and Center speaker series. We're so excited today. This is one of the sessions I've been looking forward to the most for this year so far. And I'm excited to introduce our speaker. But before I do that, just a few logistics. Please feel free to enter questions in the chat at any time. Our speaker, Mitchell's been gracious enough to allow me to interrupt him if necessary. Otherwise, we may save some of those questions for later. I'll do my best to keep up. So please feel free to share those in the chat feature. So this morning, I want to introduce Dr. Mitchell Colver, who began working in higher education in 2007, where his early experiences with students taught him to focus on the value of human diversity and human potential. As a director of the Center for Student Analytics, he believes that human empowerment and collaboration are the most powerful tools that 21st century institutions have in their arsenal to optimize the student ecosystem. His research has appeared in Popular Science, Discover, Smithsonian, New York Magazine, and internationally on numerous radio programs, including Radio BBC. With a dual appointment as an assistant professor in the School of Teacher Education and Leadership and an honorary appointment as a visiting scholar at London South Bank University, Dr. Colver champions the idea that data is always secondary to the human element. And personally, I can say that that is true as I've watched Mitchell do his work all across campus. So we're very excited to hear from him today. And take it away, Mitchell.
Thanks so much, Donna. Thanks for that introduction. I'm really pleased to be here with y'all. And just like Donna said, we'll save questions for the end, but if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat box. Donna's going to be kind of moderator because once I get into full screen, I know on this computer, Zoom doesn't like me to bring up the chat. So Donna might barge in and just tell me a question here or two, and that's just fine. I'm a flexible presenter, so we're going to take it from here. I'm going to share my screen here and get into the slides. And the presentation today is making data-informed decisions. Now, I want to introduce you to the Center for Student Analytics. Many of you probably know the Center for Student Analytics. We are a service unit here at Utah State University, and we are in a situation where this mission that we have kind of has three parts that we're pretty excited about. So first, well, it says the Center for Student Analytics empowers professional use of analytics in pursuit of student success. First, by guiding the optimization of student-facing program services and coursework. Second, facilitating collaborative use of data across university organizations and departments. And third, fostering a culture of intentional decision-making. And so our three watchwords at the center are optimization, collaboration, and intentionality. And I don't have time to talk to you about all three of these today. So we're going to start just by talking about optimization. And then I'm going to give you at the end some resources to help you think about collaboration and intentionality. So what do you mean by optimization? Well, I want to take you on a brief journey through some family history, which I think you'll appreciate because it's also kind of Logan history, none of which I knew before I came to Utah State. So I started my PhD program at Utah State in 2014. And I didn't know I'd never lived in Cache Valley. I had left Utah as a kid. We lived in Utah Valley, Provo, Orem, and then left. And then I lived all over everywhere. I didn't know any of what I'm about to tell you until well after I had lived here several years, okay? So my mother's a Moser, and many of you probably know Mosers. There's Mosers about in the Valley, and we're all related to each other. And we all descend from three brothers. Well, here in the front, bearded fellow, Andreas Moser, he's my great-great-grandfather. This is his family. They came from Switzerland in about 1883. And you can see in this journal, it talks about grandfather bought 1¼ acres of land just northwest of where Utah State University is. And this is Andreas who bought this land. And where that land is, it started as just an 1¼ acre, and then it grew. And they had a whole big farm here. And it was this, as best as I can figure, looking at the land, it was this whole big plot. Wow. Now, just to orient you, there's Old Main Tower. Over here is like Morty's Burgers, right? And they actually lived in a dugout. They indentured themselves for this land. And they lived in a dugout in this little hill here. So this, right, coming down the hill from Morty's where you turn and go past Aggie Terrace parking garage, underneath that hill, they had a dugout that they built, and they lived in that dugout for years while they worked the land and paid it off. And then eventually they were able to build this house here, which is still there. And it's not much to look at, but you go and you drive past and you think, oh man, that's just a dump or whatever. But it was a lot better than living in the side of a hill, right? And so you can see here, actually, they built it in stages. And what's here on the front here is this little kitchen they added on later, and they used to dry apricot fruit cut in half on the tin roof. That's how you used to preserve apricots. You put them on the roof until they dry out in the sun, and then you have preserves for the winter or whatever, okay? So pretty interesting. Now, why am I telling you this? Well, my great-grandfather, this is Francis Emil Moser here, he got a job working for Utah Power and Light. And they were stationed in the canyon, and there was a hydroelectric dam there, which is still there, hydroelectric plant. And so this next picture is just as you go into the canyon on the left side, there's these buildings. Now this building here in the center, it's still there. You can go and see it. When we go, it's for family picnics and stuff. This is where we go, okay? First dam is kind of off to the left. And then up here at the top of the cliff here, you have the valve house. And the shell of that valve house is also still there. These black pipes that connect these two together is called the penstock, and it's gone. They've taken that out. And what's going on here, and this is going to set up what I'm talking about, optimization. What's going on here is the hydroelectric turbine in the base of this building has to be spun at high speeds, and the river isn't moving actually quick enough to do that. So you actually have to start way up at a higher elevation, way up the river you start, and you funnel the water through what's called a flume all the way here to this valve house, and then you let all that water race down this penstock at high speed and spin the turbine. And this is back in the 1890s and thereafter. This is how we got power to the valley. And it was Emil Moser's job to go along the flume. So this is from Logan Canyon. This is actually the flume that was built. It's kind of like an aqueduct. So you can see there's a channel that holds water across the top. And this would start way further up the canyon, and so that water would be at a high elevation when it hit that valve house. So it would rush down that penstock. Well, his job was to take a bucket of tar and some cork and some straw and to keep that flume watertight. And so he would go all up and down this flume, many miles up and down this flume, and he would plug any leaks he found. That was his job. It was a great job. And so, see a leak, plug it up. That was his whole thing. And then he did it all day long. He had to carry a rifle because there was cougars up there. And he had a dog with him at all times so that, the dog could help him sniff out the cougars and whatnot. And, I learned all this, and I got to thinking about my great-grandpa, and I thought, I kind of have the same job as him, except instead of plugging up a flume, I'm plugging up a university. In terms of retention, right? We use data to try to find where are we losing students out of the university, where are we leaking students out of the university, where we really don't have to, where we really could just with some cork and some straw, we could plug up these holes and really get a better result, okay? And that's how I kind of see my job. You can see we have kind of the facial hair running in the family here. So the other thing is well, I should add this as just an aside. He would shoot cougars. Here's a picture of him and his friend Ted. They had trapped 4 cougars and shot 4 cougars that day. And of course, the tradition of shooting cougars is still alive in the Aggie family, right? We tussle with cougars all the time. And I had looked this up just for this. The first game between BYU and Utah State was in 1922. And we played it every year thereafter. We whooped them the first 8 years. We had an 8-year winning streak. I think there was a tie one of those years, but we used to beat them all the time. We've played BYU 89 times since 1922. We've won about, not half, but almost half. I think we've won 40 and they've won 49, or there's some ties in there anyway. So okay, so here's my history. This is what gets us, so okay, see a leak, plug it up. How do you know that a university is leaking students? That's the question. In a flume, you can see the water running down, right? And how do you know that the university is leaking? So, well, we know a lot of students leave the university every semester. We lose, not to missions or military service, but they leave us. We lose a little over 2,000 students a semester. Most people don't realize that. In a very real sense, there's kind of a revolving door. Students are coming in and students are going. And when we lose them, and they're not coming back, and they're not going to other institutions, it's kind of a shame. It's kind of, well, we don't need to lose that many students, right? So how can we stop this from happening? Well, how do we know, using data, how do we know that we're maybe losing more than we should? This is something you can do in IPEDS data. You can go and look, and you can kind of see institutions of our size in the nation, so 20 to 30,000 students, who admit the same kind of access population that we admit. So they're admitting 85 to 95% of the people that want to go there. So these institutions here listed, they're kind of similarly situated. They're not our benchmarking schools for IPEDS reasons, but they're, for this presentation, I wanted to build a list of similarly situated schools. And what you can see is that our retention rate is the lowest on the list. And it's a real shame. The average of all these schools is 79.5%. We're at a 73.5. That's accounting for missions, by the way. So, so we really could be doing better. This is how we know, using data, we start to say, well, could we do better? Yeah, we could do better. How do we know? Well, we look at these other universities. Now, how do you know that a university is leaking students, and how do you use data to do that, to make a data-informed decision? Well, one of the things you have to understand is this. I think a lot of people get upset around issues of assessment, evaluation, and data because they're so mathy and so science-based. But I teach a class, I taught this class last semester, or spring semester, called Becoming an Educated Consumer of Research. And in it, I really wanted my students to understand not only the scientific method, but why we use the scientific method. The scientific method is just a way of dealing with human bias. That's all it is. A long time ago, scientists figured out that human perception isn't always very accurate. And so they kind of got together and said, well, how can we fight our biases, since we have so many? I don't know if you know this, but like this hangs on my door. There's 50, this is, 50 cognitive biases to be aware of, so you can be the best version of you. So this hangs on my office door. But the point of this is to say, we use a scientific method because there's so many different ways that we can be hoodwinked into thinking something is so, that when it's not actually so. And so things of measurement and of analytics and of data are just a way of making sure that we really face the truth, and that we know what we know, and not just leave it to chance, and not just leave it to conjecture. And that's a lot of what we're doing in the Center for Student Analytics, is just taking a really closer look. And our job is to help you all to do that. We don't expect everyone to have a scientific alacrity, right? Everyone at the university kind of is at their different level of ability to do this, but whether you can do it yourself in making data-informed decisions, or you can collaborate with us, we really just want you to kind of take a little bit more of a scientific method in figuring out how to optimize and make sure that students aren't leaving when we could otherwise keep them to stay if we just serve them the way they need to be served. So the question is, how do we figure out where we are leaking students? This is a big question, right? Like, how do we know if students are leaving the institution, and they're leaving when they really wouldn't otherwise have to, if we could just get some help to them? How do we figure that out? Because one thing you have to accept is that many students are going to leave the institution legitimately. Like, whatever is going on in their life, whatever is happening for them, they're going to leave USU. We're not going to get them back, and that's okay. But when we say leaking students, what we mean is where we otherwise, if we could plug up the hole or plug up the leak, so to speak, we otherwise wouldn't have to lose them. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to take you into, and actually, I might pause here. Donna, are there any questions that before I move into this that we could get to before? Oh, you're on mute, Donna.
Mitchell, someone would like that bias form after the presentation.
Oh, great. Yeah. This one?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can email it to you.
Terrific.
Yeah. Okay, so how do we figure out where we're leaking students? Well, I used to work in student affairs, and I primarily worked as a trainer in Washington. I would train students who helped other students. So I had like a staff of 60 to 80 student workers, and then I'd run a big program in the library, tutoring program, and then I'd also do some residential bridge programs and different things. And that's how I got started in higher education, was kind of like students helping students help students, this kind of thing. And I used to do trainings where I would do these games. I did a lot of games with students, with trying to figure out how do we learn stuff? How do we know what we know? One of the games I really loved was called This or That. So I'd have the students all stand in a room, and I'd say, on that wall over there is Coke, and on that wall over there is Pepsi. Which do you like better? Go and stand on the wall that you like. And, you know, the students would go to the different sides of the room. And then you'd say, okay, come back to the middle. Okay, we're going to do now beach or mountains. Where do you want a vacation? Do you want a vacation at the beach or the mountains? Yeah. And students would go to the different sides. You know, oh, okay. Oh, wow. Everyone likes to go to the beach. Oh, how funny. And then you say, okay, who likes to study? So then I would always take the games a little bit more serious, right? I'd kind of slowly say, okay, now we're going to get academic. Do you like to study at the library or study at home? Because then this opens up a conversation to talk about what's a better choice. Or if you're going to study at home, what do you have to make sure you do? Because you're not going to have all the advantages of the library, okay? And so you have the students go to the different sides, okay? Now, you've noticed that these circles here representing these students, they're different colors. You may have thought boys and girls, but no, it actually had meaning from a data perspective. It was the blue are students that persist at the university, and the red are students that leave. And so now I'm going to rerun this here, and you're going to see, oh my goodness, wow. Looks like a lot of the students who end up leaving the university without a degree, without a diploma, they're students who were studying at home. Well, that seems curious. And that's not real data, but I do think that that pattern's meaningful. Let's look at beach mountains, okay? Was there anything there? No, we don't see a pattern there. There's no pattern of association, right? It was very clear when we looked at the study at home, study at library. It's a very clear pattern in the students who leave versus students that persist. But in beach mountains, of course, there's no pattern. That would just be spurious. It doesn't make sense. What about Coke Pepsi? No, there's no pattern there. Of course there wouldn't be. And so then you start to say, well, that one variable, study at home, study at library, it does have a pattern, and maybe that means something. Maybe we need to, you know, in this example, for instance, maybe we need to help students to figure out how to make studying at home work or studying at the library work. What if you have another type of variable? So all those examples were this or that. What if you have GPA and it's continuous? Well, most of our variables that we have at the university are measured this way. They're measured on a scale. And so what do you do there? Well, you have all the students, you can do this. You just have all the students. Well, I wouldn't do it with GPA with students. I wouldn't ask them to do that. But theoretically, for the presentation, we say, go line up along the wall where your GPA is. And then once again, you ask, you know, do you see a pattern? Are the reds kind of grouped in one area and are the blues grouped in another area? And in fact, we do find that exact thing. And you kind of build these distributions exactly like this. You kind of build a distribution and you say, okay, here's where the red students are kind of falling. Here's where the blue students are falling. And this actually gives you a wealth of information. This is actually, when we do analytics, a lot of what we're doing is this kind of work. And in fact, these are the charts that we build, and they work the exact same way as lining students up along a wall. In this case, for average grade in a Canvas class or in a class in the middle of the semester. So on this scale, the 1 is 100%, 0.9 is 90%, 80%. You can see students above an 85% and higher. You might be thinking, why does it go above 1? Oh, that's because extra credit actually. But 85 and above tend to persist, whereas 85% and below, they tend not to persist. It's the difference between the lines that really starts to matter. As analysts, we have equations that help us to measure the white space between these two lines. And when a variable turns out having a lot of white space between the students who leave and the students who go, then it's predictive and informative about where we may be leaking students that we otherwise wouldn't have to leak if we could kind of plug up those leaks.
Mitchell,
So, yeah, go
sorry,
ahead.
Mitchell, just a quick question. As we go through this, Bobby asks, how do you know which will persist and which won't? That must be based on past data.
It's
right?
past data, it's historical data. So we look in the past, we say what happened in the past based on, did they study at home or study at library? And then what happened at the end of the semester? And I should say persistence, I'm saying this word because I use it all the time. Persistence means they're enrolled one semester and then they're here back again the next semester. And that's what we would call persistence, whereas retention is year to year. A lot of what we're doing is looking at term to term persistence. So,
Thank you.
Yeah, so the white space becomes really valuable statistically. It helps us measure when a variable may be of interest, may be of importance for having the conversation about why students leave when they otherwise shouldn't or might not. And it works the same way in the rooms. You can kind of see like there's more of a red side to the room and more of a blue side, and there's kind of this white space in the middle between those groups. And that's how we build these exact same charts. And we build hundreds of these, and we start to figure out, okay, there's white space. Not all of the variables look this way, right? There's a lot of variables when you line them up. There's not a lot of difference in between the lines at all. And this is a beach mountains type variable. It doesn't help us. It's not predictive. It doesn't help us to figure out where the leak is. You see, it's these variables that have space between the red and the blue line, looking in the past, that we start to say this really matters. Is there another question, Donna? Was there?
Not for now.
Okay, so now, so how do we know which variables are the most important? Well, we build these big models, excuse me, and we call this the student data discovery funnel. We start with 800 variables. That's all available data. I don't know if you, from Banner, from Canvas, and from card swipes. So our student information system, our learning management system, and card swipes. Well, there's 800 things. There's 800 things we can know about our students. You probably don't know that. There's lots of things you can calculate and figure out about students, okay? Well, we run logistic regression. First, we run what's called a random forest, and that helps us figure out, okay, which ones actually help us predict when a student's going to stay or go. And it turns out there's 60 to 70 variables in the model, in the 800, that actually end up predictive. And what do I mean by that? Well, a lot of the things we know about our students are kind of beach mountain-y kind of things. They don't predict whether or not a student's going to stay or leave. There's a lot of stuff we know about our students that doesn't help you figure out how successful they're going to be. But it turns out that there's a lot of variables, about 60 to 70 at a time, that really like study at library, study at home, that really you go, oh, that actually helps us to figure out who might be on their way out the door. The other thing is that 60 to 70 is too many to have in a single model. And so the model's penalized for complexity. And all that means is that about 50 of the variables are reduced to near zero contribution to make the model stronger. And that means that there ends up being about 15 to 20 variables in any model that we create that really matter. And the funny thing is because we're measuring things from different perspectives, all of those variables kind of group into usually about 5 to 8 themes that are actionable. And so when you build a model for students, you can build a model for all of the students in the College of Science. And it will look at all of the students in the College of Science, and it will take the 800 things we know about them. It'll find the things that are predictive, and then we can penalize the model to make it so that here's the ones that really matter the most. And then we group that to develop insights. For example, if we were speaking with the associate dean or dean of the College of Science, we could group those variables into 5 to 8 themes that would give that leadership insights about how to plug leaks in the university. When that process is done, whether we do it for the College of Science, or we do it for a statewide campus, for the Blanding campus, or we do it for all undergraduate students, or we do it for all online students, you can build it all different ways. No matter how you build it, when you're done with this process, you have all available measured differences between students who stay and students who leave. And that's super powerful, because when you end up with this list of 5 to 8 themes, what the list represents is all available measured leaks. And then you can start to plug them. You can say, okay, well, if this is a leak, what can we do about it? And different examples are students leak for all different kinds of reasons. A lot of students leak early in their academic career because they don't have a sense of belonging. We are starting to see that getting a declared major that the student can finish in is a really important part of developing an academic sense of belonging. And so one of the variables that shows up pretty consistently is, have they declared yet? Are they in a program they can complete? Because if they're not, then they're not as likely to succeed. We see a lot of students leaving because they get stuck in too much exploration. In fact, changing your major can be a good thing. Like if you declare into one and then to switch, a lot of students, oh no, I don't want to have to switch my major. It's like, no, actually, it's better to be declared and switch than it is to stay exploratory for 3 years. Really, we see that in the data, it's pretty clear. There's other examples. Students' activity in Canvas matters a lot. How many times a week are they logging in compared to their peers in the same class, right? So we always look at the same class. We say, okay, this student's getting in less than once a week. And these other students are getting in 3 or 4 times in the same class. And what we see is the students who's getting in 1 time or less, this is a variable that's helping us predict that in fact they're going to leave the institution. So because of this funnel, we're able to predict with 85% accuracy whether or not any given student will stay or leave Utah State without a degree. So that's pretty powerful. Well, let me give you an example of plugging a leak, optimizing the university around one of these insights. So in July 2017, we turned on one of these models for the first time, and we were kind of looking at some of the things. And one of the leaks that I presented to an analytics executive committee was this idea about early registration, or what we really call on-time registration. And what we saw is that attrition rates were twice as great for students who were registering within a month of the start of term as students who are registering before that. So here, like again, it's this white space between that orange bar graph and the blue one that we go, oh, the blue one's much too long. It's way longer than we think it should be. Now, this is a correlation. It starts as a correlation. And when we optimize around these things, we start with kind of a theory of change that, is it possible if we could get students to register earlier that we could close this gap? It's still just a hypothesis, because we're not doing like a randomized control. We don't know that early registration, at least in July 2017, we didn't know, but we were willing to give it a try, okay? And so we kind of planned, we did some planning. So Heidi Kessler in the Office of Retention, she surveyed students like, why aren't you registering early? We learned some interesting things. They didn't know when registration was open. They hadn't met with their advisor. They didn't know what classes, okay. We went with student marketing to develop an advertising campaign. Michael Bjorkia did a lot of she was the tip of the spear on this campaign. We talked to the analytics that we presented to the advisors. We said, okay, here's what we need you to know. We also developed a nudge template. Can we get students to come into appointments earlier so we can get more appointments? So I don't know if you remember this back like 3 years ago, spring registration campaign, all these signs, there were signs in the lawn and there was banners on canvas and all this, okay? So reminding everyone to register. And then more than 100 advisors got busy and targeted nudges to students in advance of registration to get them in before registration even opened. And this is really amazing, and this is why I really believe that data is always secondary to human ingenuity, because if you can look at this, the advisors in October, November that year met with an additional 1,700 or 1,800 appointments in 2 months, October, November. And so like analytics can get things going, but we had like a paper with some analytics on it. Okay, great, cool. But that's like the pebbles that start an avalanche, right? The falling of little pebbles that start a whole big avalanche. Well, the avalanche is human ingenuity, it's human work. It's blood, sweat, and tears. We never want to come away from data thinking the data saves the day. The data doesn't save the day. The professionals save the day. And in this case, it's these advisors getting to work and doing this really hard work, meeting with all these students. Well, did we move the needle? Absolutely. We saw higher participation on the first day of open registration than we had ever seen before. It's 54% compared to an average before 44%. We did this 2 years running. So the first year we did it was for spring 18, and then we did it again for spring 19. And we did it for spring 20. I don't have the spring 20 data yet, but you can see we moved those 2 blue lines way over and broke the trend, which is really great. And you can see we reached the 70% mark about 4 days earlier. We reached the 80% mark about 8 days earlier. So the graph shows the result of the whole institution kind of coming together to decide that early registration matters and that we could get students to register early. Now, but the real question, that's cool, but why does early registration matter? Well, the theory was if we could get them to register early, then more of them would stay in subsequent terms. Early registration makes you have a great semester, and having a great semester makes you stay at Utah State 1 more semester. Well, is that true? Well, we did an analysis. I asked the data scientist that works in our office, Braden Ross, just recently, can you get me a logistic regression on that? So he did. And his logistic regression determined that for every 5 days a student waits to register, their actual persistent rate drops 1%. So for every 100 students we can get to register 5 days earlier than before, we are effectively retaining one of those students who would have otherwise not persisted. So then I took Braden's results and I built this and I said, okay, well, what happened in spring 18-19? Did we save anyone? So here's how it works. You start with the baseline. how many days did students spend waiting to register in spring 2017? Turns out it's 186,000 days. Well, what does that mean? So if Tom waits 3 days to register and Sally waits 15, Tom and Sally have combined waited 18 days. Well, with our 20,000, 25,000 students, all the number of days they spend waiting to register adds up to 186,000 days. It's a lot of days. Well, what were we able to do in 2018? We were able to get that down to 142,000 days. So it was a difference, a reduction in days of 43,000 days. In spring 19, it was a reduction of 45,000 and change. You divide that by 5 because that's the rate of change, is the fifth of 1%, okay? Then you divide it by the population, and then you multiply it by 1%, who is the 1% that we're gonna be saving. And basically what you see is that 87 students were retained as a result of the efforts in spring. 87 students had a better semester because they registered earlier, and 91 students in spring 19. And then you can multiply that by our average tuition revenue, $23.69 for one term. And we also made money. So by asking students to register early, we not only helped 90 students each of these years get one semester closer to graduation, but it brought in all that tuition revenue also. So really good return on investment for what analytics is and for the process of it. This is basically clogging a leak, right? If you're wondering, like, what does it mean to clog a leak? This is clogging a leak. We saw that late registration really negatively impact our students. We got together as a university, we did something about it. And as a result, students remained enrolled, persisting towards their goals. Now, you may want more examples. You may want, well, what else matters? Where else are there leaks? What else can we do? So last year we put out a Students Insights Report, fall 2019. You can download this report at usu.edu/AIS/analytics. The 2020, fall 2020 is in production right now. There was a delay, but it's coming, it's forthcoming. Anyway, nobody wants to read anything in the first week of classes anyway. So you can read last year's if you're really anxious. And about 2 weeks from now, I'm hoping that this year's will be available and we'll mail it out to everyone. You'll get a copy, or digital copy or something. We'll get it to you, okay? But this booklet contains all little kinds of insights that you can go, 20 insights that you can go through and you can say what matters when we're trying to run a university. The top thing that mattered, turns out, in terms of, it's not just how do you figure out where we are leaking students, but how do you figure out what stops the leaks? That book helps you to figure out that too. And the top thing that we found is that academic advising outside the classroom, this is worth saying. I'm going to talk about advising here for a minute here, but it's worth saying that the #1 retention tool that we have in higher education is the faculty. And the reason for that is because the core service offered by the university is the classroom experience with the faculty and that the students have in the disciplines in their majors, in their academic kind of experiences. If your classes are awful, then your retention rates are awful. If your classes are excellent, then your retention rates are excellent. Because that's the core experience that students are having. If students are leaving, they're leaving because primarily because they're not having a good time academically, okay? But beside that, you can lay that aside and you say, of course, that's the #1 retention tool. Faculty do such a good job for our students. That's the #1 retention tool. But after that, what matters? What helps us clog leaks? Well, it turns out academic advisors are pretty clearly the #1 service. Now, a lot of other things matter, but there's so many advisors and they have such a large impact because they meet with students so regularly. We really see them affecting student well-being. Well, that's what this graph is about here. So the thing is analytics around the nation are revealing an unseen equity gap. Across universities, not just ours, vulnerable students are often served less than more successful students. And so this is the College of Education's data. This is from, I want to say this was spring 19. Yeah, spring 19. And you can see the gray column on the far left says 89%. This means that 89% of their students in that college were served. But then you break that 89% out into levels of student vulnerability based on our predictions. And what you can see is that the red students were being served. Only 1 in 4 red students was being served. Red is the category of greatest vulnerability. Then orange were only being served at a rate of 60%, and yellow students were only being served at a rate of 78%. So there's this kind of staircase effect. We call it an equity gap. And it's really concerning because we know that advising impacts the red, orange, and yellows like 8 times greater than it impacts the blues, right? So if we're not spending time with the students who are vulnerable based on these models, that can be a real problem for persistence, for retention. So we showed this data to the College of Education administrators. And we kind of said, hey, we want to work with high-performing units to figure out what are some successful forms of getting those red, orange, and yellow students to come to appointments. And then we collaborated with the unit leads to tune expectations. And we took a humanistic approach. We really wanted the teams to feel like they could do this work. And I really have to give credit to Francine Johnson, who took the bull by the horns and empowered her advisors to do really high-quality work, and to really give that leadership to incentivize closing that equity gap. And so the following semester, you can see that that equity gap was closed, right? 100% of the red students were served, 91% of the orange, 83% of the yellow. And the really amazing thing is that not only did their persistence change 1.4%, which you may say 1.4%, you know, that's no big deal. Well, the College of Education is 4,000 students, and 1.4% of 4,000 is 45 people. So their year-on-year persistence change increased 45 students, which is really, I mean, you can't buy those kinds of results. But the really compelling thing here is if you look at that gray column, it says 79%, whereas the semester before it was 89%. They actually got a better result serving slightly less people because they targeted their outreach to the people for whom their contact would matter the most. And so that's 45 students, or if you want to put it in tuition, it's 106,000 in retained tuition just for one semester. It's 45 families who have a student one semester closer to graduation in that college, 45 communities who are one semester closer to having a graduate return and contribute to their community, 45 students who are one semester closer to getting their goals. And so this is another example of, again, we identified a leak where we were leaking students because we weren't necessarily meeting with the most vulnerable. And then we said, well, let's clog that leak. And sure enough, it works. Now, I promised before we move to question, I promised that I was going to tell you, some other resources. So what can I do to optimize my area? Well, we do want you to optimize and plug leaks as you find them. And there's a lot of things that you can do to do that. But the first thing is you may not have experience doing evaluation or this kind of thing. So I want to call your attention to our website. So usu.edu/AIS/analytics. And I'm actually going to go there now. So if you go to this website and then see this orange arrow, it says click on media. So I'm going to go there and click on media. And it takes you to these webinars, and it's a bunch of hours of me talking. Sorry, you probably will have heard enough of me by today, but there's a whole bunch of me just like blabbing on about how to do good work. All right, well, one of them that I want to call your attention to is practical analytics in student affairs evaluation. And this is a webinar that I did last year, which has been well received. And I've been asked to give this presentation numerous times around the nation also. And it just gets you started. I mean, if you don't know where to start with evaluation, this is your webinar, okay? And it's just me kind of going through some different things of talking about different things that you can do. Step one is 4 steps, right? So it's a step process of how do you think through the things that you need to do in order to effectively evaluate your programs, step 2, step 3. So I want to call your attention to that. And then here's the best part. We put in our thing here, optimization, yeah. So intentionality, that webinar is going to help you with intentionality. And then collaboration. Well, what's the other thing you can do? You can collaborate with us. You don't have to do this by yourselves. We're a service unit. Our job, and this is my staff. So there I am, and Amanda Hagman's a data wrangler, data scientist, but we call her data wrangler, which is great. Megan Lewis, the data engineer, and Braden Ross, also a data scientist. And we are just waiting for you to reach out to us to collaborate, to help you figure out where your leaks are, or if you're something that stops a leak. A lot of our programs, we know, so here's Donna, career services. We can evaluate career service. We can say, does career services help plug the leaks? And we're finding a lot of these services, absolutely, they help plug the leaks, right? And so we want to help you to come to know what can be better, what's going well at your service, and also what can be better at your service. And so we really expect that you'll reach out to us and kind of, we can do good work together. It's our job. We're a service unit. Okay, so we're gonna move into Q&A. I just wanna close out by just giving thanks. Like, I really appreciate the opportunity to come to speak to you all. I also want to kind of front load this. We have about 15 minutes for questions. I did that on purpose because people have good questions about this work. And I do want to spend 15 minutes with y'all. So kind of get your fingers going in the chat box, and I'm going to come out of my slide share, and then we can just have a good conversation, right? So let's do that. So let me stop the share here, and let's go to the questions.
Yeah. We've had some thanks in the box already, and
Okay.
I can definitely attest to working with Mitchell's team. They're an amazing group of people, and please reach out if you haven't had a chance. And I do think starting with that video is a really good way to generate the ideas around what the questions might be.
Yeah. So let's see here. Oh, how does Mitchell know which students will persist and which ones? Oh, so we answered this earlier, but I just want to be clear about this. So we start, when we build models, we start with historical data, and we do something that's called, you train the model on some set of years, and then you test the model on another set of years. So say we take year 2005 to 2015, and we train a model on that. We help the model to figure out what's going on with student data. Now, we already know what happened in 2016, but we don't give the model 2016. We only give it 2005 through 2015, and we cut it off. We say, you don't get to know 2016. And then we show it 2016's data, but not 2016's results. And we tell the model, now guess the results of 2016. We already know, because we know it's already in the past. But computer, you don't know. So who stayed and who left? And then it answers, it says, well, we think these students will leave and these students will stay. And then we compare that to what actually happened. And that's where we get this 85% accuracy. We say the computer was able to guess who stayed and who went 85% of the time. Now you might saying, well, 85%, is that good? Is that bad? That's really good. Okay, so if it's who stayed or who left, it's a 50-50 chance anyway. So an orangutan could tell you half the time which student is going to stay or go. So you start at 50, and if you can get that up to 85, 90%, then you're pretty happy. You can't get above 90% because it's not a crystal ball. But so you use what's called training semesters, where you train the data on those semesters, and then you do what's called a test semester, where you already know the outcome, but then you compare the model to what actually happened.
Mitchell, could you address a little bit what the numbers have to be to make this meaningful? I know some of our units and some of what you might be facing might have smaller numbers for us to work with. Can you address that a little bit?
Absolutely. So one of the things that I want you to understand is that we will always help you wherever you're at. We'll meet you where you're at. One of the things that we say to folks is that if you don't reach out to us now because you're worried that it's going to take 2 years for you to get everything together, then 2 years from now, you still won't have reached out, right? Like a lot of times when people reach out to us, we get them going, and it's going to take 2 years for them to get, but then 2 years goes by and they're like, oh, we're ready. And it's like, oh, great, we're ready. You have enough data. When I worked in Washington, I ran a tutoring program, started in 2010. In 2011, I started trying to get some statistics together to show whether or not it had an effect. And we just didn't have the numbers. We didn't have enough people participating for there to be enough power, what's called statistical power, to figure that out. So I waited another year, 2012, again, not enough. And I even combined the years, 2011, 12, no, it wasn't enough. So I waited another year, keeping the data the same way, being fastidious. 2013, we finally showed a result. And it was because I had been patient doing 3 years of really careful data collection and keeping it in the same format. And then we had that same result 2013 and 2014. And in fact, it was, I think it's to date, it was the first paper that showed that undergraduate peer tutoring actually has an estimated causal impact on the student's GPA. There had been like 3 papers before that had gotten close, but none. And so here I was just some guy in Washington, just doing my job as a tutor coordinator. And then we published off of it, and it was the first academically published journal article. You would think that this had happened at some point. And this was the crazy thing, is we looked at the literature. It had never happened. Nobody had ever, no scientist had ever sat down and said, you know, that whole thing they're doing undergraduate peer tutoring, does that even work? There was attempts, but none of them as robust as ours. And so it was a good paper, but it took 3 years before we even got to that point. And so you always have to start somewhere. And so start with us, don't be worried, and start. But to answer the question is, the other thing is that we don't always do quantitative analysis. We are versed in survey research and in qualitative data collection. And in fact, we like doing qualitative research when the numbers just aren't there, because that can be a rich experience too. And so an example of that is when COVID-19 hit here this last spring. On the last day of March, my Vice President Robert, my boss, he said to me, we're going to have some really good analytics coming out of this, aren't we? And I said, sure thing, boss. And then we hung up the call, and I thought, oh no. The challenge is this: all of our models are based on history. And when something like COVID-19 happens, it's pretty idiosyncratic, which means it confuses the models. It makes the model think things are true that aren't true because there's weird stuff happening. For example, think about how many students had not been using Canvas very much and then had to use Canvas a lot. Well, we saw 2,000 students move from the red, orange, and yellow categories in those prediction models to the blue within a couple of weeks. And it was crazy. It was crazy. The computer was looking and saying, wow, yes. Sally and Tom, they've all figured out how to use Canvas. Things are just going so well for them. No, the computer doesn't realize we're in the middle of a global pandemic and people are moving to remote teaching. And so it upgrades them. It says, oh, this student's going to be just fine. This student's going to be just fine. And so we knew that. And so I, thinking about what my boss had said, like, hey, we're going to have some good stuff coming out of this. I thought, well, the thing is good qualitative data always begins. Good quantitative data, numbers, always begin as qualitative data. And so I spun up a series of focus groups, and I ran about 7 hours of focus groups with students to ask them about their experiences and to collect data that way. Later, I was asked to help one of the departments do more. So I've been in like 25 hours of focus groups over the summer of talking to students, asking them questions about their lived experiences. And we're taking that knowledge that they're sharing with us and we're building analytics off of it, right? We're learning what they think and what their experiences are. And then we're going back and now we're starting to measure those things that matter. And so for your programs, where you're at, if you don't feel you're running a big enough operation to have the numbers there, we still want to look at your numbers, but we also can help you think about ways to collect other forms of data that would still be helpful. It looks like Sam.
Yeah, Sam has a question around, are you available for statewide or even national models? And, yes. And of course, I know the answer, but you share it.
Yeah, so statewide, yes. National, we can talk about national data sets. We do tend to focus just on USU, but USU is statewide. So statewide is USU, and we serve statewide campuses. We're happy to do that. And so Sam, we could definitely have a chat. It also looks like Heather Thomas wants to know when fall semester will become active in the advising analytics dashboard.
Yes.
The Inspire dashboard should be active as of yesterday. The Advising Matters dashboard, which is another analytics dashboard, it should be ready within a few days. It takes a few days to populate.
So by the end of the week, they should have access to all of that material, that information.
And I'm monitoring it, Heather, and if it doesn't happen,
Could you give us just a little sneak peek of what what you learned from all those focus groups, Mitchell?
Yeah, so I can tell you briefly, students were very aware that faculty use of technology, mature use of technology, was going to be critical moving forward in this. Now you say, well, obviously that's true. But the students remarked repeatedly how when their faculty weren't savvy with Canvas, weren't savvy with Zoom, it negatively impacted their academic experience. Now you say, well, obviously. The other thing is that students were understanding. They understood that faculty had been kind of, bullied into this by the global pandemic, by the circumstances, by the pandemic, right? And so they had this kind of like, well, it really sucked when my faculty wasn't up to speed on Canvas or, okay. And so there was this forgiveness of like, I understand it's been rough for everyone and it's been rough. They said that. But then the next breath was, but now they have to get it right. Like moving forward for fall, for this coming academic year, they have to get those skills. And the university has spun up so much as part of USU Ready campaign, has done such a good job. Neil Legler and his team in City and the ETE program has done, Travis Thurston and the ETE program have done such a good job at spinning up so many resources that will help students to get what they need, or to have faculty to get what they need so they can help students to have a good experience.
So 2 points. We had a follow-up question to that. Do you think their patience level is going to go down a little bit by fall if they're still seeing that limited tech savviness? So
no, right. It's the opposite, right? Like
really?
the longer that faculty hold out on developing those skills, the more frustrating it will be.
Exactly, makes sense. Also, we had a question around just generally, do you have some advice for departments in data gathering? I know for us, for example, in our first destination surveys, we had added a whole quadrant, and appropriately so, of questions around COVID. Did you have an offer that got taken back? Was it delayed? You know, so do you have any advice for any of us around that data gathering piece?
Yeah, so I think when you think about how to gather the right data, that's partly what that webinar is about. And just to give you a preview, you have to start with what outcomes are important to you and your unit. That's always step one, is what outcomes are we trying to achieve? And then 2 is what activities have we planned to reach those outcomes? And then the data always has to be referent to the selected outcomes and the planned activities. So the data always has to be a bridge between figuring out what's important in terms of those outcomes and do they link to what we're actually doing. Now, there is some other ways to collect data and figuring out what outcomes are important. Maybe you don't know. Maybe
Right.
you've just randomly selected the outcomes for your programs or service and you want to know, are these the right ones? Well, you can collect data around that. The other thing is what data is going to link the activities to the outcomes. Like, here's all the work we do. Does it actually lead to the things we want? Again, you have to think through that pretty intentionally. So that webinar is all about those steps of building out what we call a theory of change, which is when you come to work, the point is to change something. And if you're not changing something, you probably need to question what you're doing. Yeah. So.
All right, wonderful. Any other questions? I'm happy to check a couple sites. I've got a couple chat boxes, but I think I've gotten them all. If I've missed anything, please ask again. Yeah, here we go. You see that question? Are departments that are using data to determine which courses to be offered to other departments?
Yeah, so good question, Shanice. Are there departments using data to determine what courses should be offered? Yes, but not in a uniform or systematic way. So we probably could get better at that. And it is kind of what we would call a wicked problem in higher education. We don't know of any university that is doing a good job of that. We actually spun up a prototype, let me explain it to you, which is not launched yet, but it's kind of, we architected this, we built it, and we're just kind of trying to test to see if it could be used. But DegreeWorks, when a student fills out a 4-year degree plan, it shows where they're going to take all their classes. Now we know that those plans change a lot, but what if departments could look, the question we had was, what if departments could look at what students are saying they're going to take? And what if we could build a model that actually inflates or deflates those numbers based on what actually happens, right? So we know the plans don't always stay the same, and we know they change a lot and students take courses out of order and these kinds of things. But we have enough data that we can actually figure out how to tinker those numbers so that we could tell a department based on the number of DegreeWorks plans that say this anthropology class is needed, which is like 80, we actually think you need 45 seats, because historically, anytime there's been 80 things in DegreeWorks, only 45 have actually been enrolled. And so you could actually do 18 months, 2 years ahead, Shanice, you could do this kind of planning out of how many seats are needed for any given section of any given course. When we built it, we just didn't have enough years of data. So here it was. So I asked this question maybe 2 years ago, and we realized we needed to start working on that model then. And even 2 years later now, we still don't have enough data to make it accurate. And so we've pushed it out another 6 months. So we'll look again in November, and then we'll look again in April. And I think by April, we might have something, and then we'll get back to you about that.
That's so interesting, because I remember long ago and far away when that was the tool we were looking at purchasing for the university. And one of the selling points was that it would allow us to do just that. That you could look ahead and know exactly how many physics seats you would need 18 months out. But it's sounding like in reality, the raw data needed to be placed with some predictive data so that it really was meaningful. Is that what's gone down?
That's exactly right. The other thing is, one of the reasons why we couldn't run the model now was because widespread adoption of degree analytics, of degree works, excuse me, had not taken place when we first started collecting all that data. We were at like 65%. Now we're at like 90%, right? We're just trying to get more advisors and students using DegreeWorks. And the more people that use it, and we're pretty good. Michael Bjorkia and her team has really done a really good job at getting the word out of the importance of DegreeWorks. Also Fran Hopkin in the registrar's office. And so we want to be able to do it, but the data just wasn't there because there were so many holes in students that had plans versus students that didn't have plans in the first semester we collected the data. Now we're starting to see a lot more robust of a data set, and that gives us confidence that by November or maybe April, we might be able to predict with some accuracy how many seats departments need to offer, particularly of larger classes where it's, English 1010, English 2010, where it really matters that we know. We don't have to predict it for everything for it to be a win. So
for our little section of the world, though, that is important. We teach about 800 students in career development courses, but we're constantly looking ahead to see if we need to bring someone else up to speed on the content, and we almost need the semester before for them to job shadow. So this information is so valuable across so many units on campus.
Even just 6 months lead time makes a huge difference.
That would be nice.
When you have to hire someone and get them ready to teach. Yeah, so we're going to try to get you that extra.
Really useful. Well, we've just got a couple minutes left. If there is another question, you're getting a lot of thanks in the chat, and we so appreciate that. And again, just for everyone else, I think they're all aware by now, but if anyone new is on the call, we'll be putting that PowerPoint, and if you could include that bias chart, I think we've got a lot of interest there, as well as this webinar will be at usu.edu/collaborative. And should be up just in a few days, so you can go there and follow up. Please follow up. I can't recommend enough Mitchell's team. They're a great group of data wranglers. I love that title. And really, really ready, able to help. And if you've got some project you'd like to collaborate with across campus, I think that even adds even more robustness to what we're discovering if we've collaborated. So again, thank you so very much, Mitchell. I'm happy to hang for a minute, as is Mitchell. He's already said he'd hang out if there are any more questions. But again, thank you so much. We'll see you in about 2 weeks for Harrison Kleiner's presentation, Dr. Harrison Kleiner, around curriculum and careers not being a straight line. So that should be really interested. We do the clarification around teaching assistants and research assistants. So that might be something that you could reach out to Sam too.
So Sam, I would reach out to Travis Thurston, who's working on training for teaching assistants. For research assistants, I think you need to go through the Division of Research. What's that called?
Okay, through Alexa Sand, maybe.
Yeah. Office of Research. That's what it's called.
Yes.
Now. Alexa Sand. Yeah.
Sand. Sorry.
Yep.
Last name, I'm off a syllable. I so appreciate everyone, and look forward to seeing you again in just a few weeks. We're going to hang for a few minutes, so feel free to keep asking those questions. Otherwise, thank you so very much.
Yep. Thank you all.
All right. Let's see anything else coming in. Sam has raised a hand as well. Just said a big thank you.
Leslie Woodward says, does the work you do require IRB review?
Oh, good question, Leslie.
Good question.
No. So sometimes, but not usually. So IRB, Institutional Review Board, is for the review of human subjects research. And the definition of human subjects research is producing knowledge that would be generalizable. And we don't have human subjects. We have students, and we're producing knowledge so that we can run the university. is what we're doing, could it be generalized? Yeah, we're not trying to generalize it though. We run information through our systems so that we can make decisions about how to run our university. Now, anytime we want to go to publish something that would be in a scientific paper or something, then we have to go through the human subjects IRB approval. And we do that in some cases, but it's the minority of the work that we do. The majority of the work that we do is just running the university, helping to run the university. And there's not an IRB process for using the university's data to make good decisions about how to run it in terms of like running a business. So it's a good question. There's kind of this two prongs of research, what's called, scientific human subject space research that's needing IRB approval. And then there's what we're doing, which is more applied research for organizational functioning. And that's not governed by IRB.
Is it also partly due to the fact that it's aggregate data? Or does that not?
Because we work with non-aggregated data. We often publish our results in aggregate, which you do in scientific papers also.
Which you have.
So it's an important conversation, and it's a nuanced conversation. But a lot of times people assume that we're doing the same kind of research that faculty members would do. I'm a faculty member, I have to do research, but when I do my faculty research, I go through IRB. When I'm doing my job, I'm doing my job for the university. I'm publishing those results to the members or officers of the institution, not to the scientific community. And that's part of the distinction. It's not the whole thing.
Let's see if there's anything else I might have missed, because I do have a question of my own.
Yeah.
I've always wondered, and about, for lack of a better term, the dark side of predictive analytics. And again, the more I've learned, the less I'm afraid of that dark side, which makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
But when I hear in traveling something like, for example, we know what an engineering student looks like who can come to this university, persist, and graduate. That freaks me out.
That's bad. Yeah.
So how do we temper all the good that comes out of this, using data analytics to make better informed, more useful, effective decision-making with that kind of thinking or commentary? Yeah. And maybe it's too much of a question for now, but
that's a good question. I can answer it. Emerson said that everything has two handles, and you really need to make sure that you're holding the right one. And so with data analytics, large data sets, predictive models, we have taken the ethics conversation seriously to the point that Utah State and the Center for Student Analytics has become a national voice in analytics ethics in higher education.
Great.
And so I'm invited to sit on panels, and I'm invited to sit on advisory groups about ethics of student data. And we take it pretty seriously and have led out on some important conversations about the strengths, but also the limitations of predicted data. So I have a piece I wrote, a chapter I can maybe we can send out. It's called Cognitive Ergonomics, and it talks about that exact thing.
I love it.
There's a good book you can read called Weapons of Math Destruction. Weapons of Math Destruction. But to answer the question, you should never use a predictive model to see if students should be included for a benefit or excluded from a benefit. That's what it is. You can use a predictive model to see if they'll be included for a benefit, but you should never use a predictive model to see if they should be excluded. So in terms of admissions, if we were building predictive models and then saying, who should we admit and who should we deny? Well, then you're excluding students based on a prediction, and you should never do that. It's the prediction models are not capable of accurately excluding people. Now, if you want to talk about inclusion, that's okay, because if we include Johnny in a benefit that he didn't end up needing, Johnny's still okay.
Right.
But if we exclude him from a benefit he did need, then he's not okay, right? And so this has come up once or twice. Administrators have asked me, hey, can we use your predictive models in our admissions process? And I have to absolutely, under no circumstances, no, you cannot, because you would be excluding people from the benefit rather than including them. So it's a big, important issue. It's something that we could spend more time on. We could spend a whole webinar on, but it's a good question, Donna.
Our team is currently reading Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. Have you read that?
I haven't, but Gladwell's a great author.
So good, but there's a lot in the early chapters around bias and how much, even experienced CIA officers couldn't uncover the CIA operatives that were double agents in Cuba. We're all 3 or 4 chapters in wondering, when are we going to get some tools or something that helps us believe that we're not all just completely out of base and have no innate ability to make good, effective judgments.
Well,
So I tell you, that book, if you haven't read it, is really a wonderful way to drive you to some of the work that Mitchell's doing, because we want some help and support. And I think, if anything, that book tells us that our own innate abilities to make these judgments on a gut level may not be at all accurate, and that we need more support and more information.
That's right. When I meant to say this earlier, when I showed those 50 cognitive biases, I say, I hang that on my door.
Wow.
I think people come away with the impression that maybe I think I'm not cognitively biased. And that's absolutely not true. The scientific method is grounded in the notion that we're all biased to the point that you can't escape it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the best thing you can do is mitigate and manage your biases. And so I think people come away from that door hanging thinking, oh, he thinks he's not biased. No, to the contrary, I think I'm extraordinarily biased. And as a result, I try to use the tools that science gives us to temper those biases and really come away with a much better result than I would if I acted like I didn't have any or buried my head in the sand, which is a bias.
Yeah.
There's what's called the blind spot bias, which is the bias that we're not biased.
Exactly.
Yeah, so.
Exactly. This has been so interesting. And for those of us that really like data, we could probably do this all day long with Mitchell, but I want to be cognizant of your time. We've got about 11 participants that are still hanging in there listening. So if any of you have any questions, take a moment now, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and again, thank Mitchell for his time. I think this is the group that wants to hang in, that would love more conversation, but I want to be aware we're hitting the lunch hour.
And I see, Leslie, I see your comment. Yeah, we can work with you to look at the Tutor Center in US USA. I think we've already looked at statewide tutoring, Leslie, and the results were really good.
Really good.
Yeah. So
are you going to be looking at anything besides retention or persistence? And if it was something else, what would it be?
Well, so the webinar that I linked you to, it explains why we love persistence so much.
Yeah.
Do we look at other things? We look at other things all the time. We primarily look at persistence, and there's some reasons we do that, which are explained in the webinar. It's not the only thing that matters, but it sure makes our lives easy in terms of sorting through what can be a pretty challenging conversation of what matters.
Yeah.
Persistence matters a lot, usually.
Yeah.
And so we just like to stick with it. We use it as kind of the umbrella. We talk about other things. We're happy to talk about other things. But in some cases, persistence would be completely inappropriate. For example, we'll think about like the Access and Diversity Center, or now it's called the Inclusion Center. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We don't do that. We do that, and it may help students persist. I don't know that we've assessed it. Okay. We haven't, because it's hard to collect data on who comes in there. Okay. But the point is we don't do that only so that students persist. We do it because it's right. It's morally right to have an inclusion center. And so a lot of times, this is called quantification bias. A lot of times the things that matter most can't be measured, and the things that we measure don't matter that much. And so quantification bias, we try to avoid that by making sure that we ground ourselves in sometimes the numbers, sometimes persistence matters, sometimes the numbers matter. Sometimes it's other stuff that matters, stuff you can't measure, but you still need to have the conversation. So
I really appreciated your talk about qualitative data being the precursor to, because that's where the whys crop up, right? Where you start to see something that doesn't seem right, or it's new, or it's an interesting phenomenon, and that's really a wonderful conversation for us to be having. I so appreciate that.
Well, and it's worth saying that when COVID times happened, a whole bunch of universities and national higher education organizations put out surveys pretty rapidly to ask students, to ask professionals, like, what's going on, and rate this and rate that. Almost none of them were qualitative. And the problem with that is it assumed that the writer of the survey knew what the answers would be, and that people should be able to rate it from 1 to 7. And the thing is that's why we did focus groups, because it's like, how do you don't even know what the question is, let alone the answers. Like and so we did focus groups. But USU was good because I think we collected over 50 pages of, I think 55 pages of qualitative student feedback through surveys, including the Latin Ecce Center. They did a survey of their students, which was qualitative, which was really good. And then from faculty, we collected like another 45, 55 pages. And so I read all of that word for word. And so I ended up reading about 110 pages. I clocked it. It took 18 hours to read 110 pages of student qualitative feedback in surveys and faculty qualitative survey feedback. And I think I'm the only person who did. I don't know, I haven't heard of anyone else that read all of those 110 pages, but it was grueling, but worth it. And the insights that came from it will serve me for the rest of my career because it was such a helpful read. But that qualitative data really matters, especially in an idiosyncratic situation where we don't have anything to ground this in. The last thing we could ground this is 100 years ago, right? The Spanish flu. So,
yeah, we don't have a lot of those people to talk to.
that's right.
Any, right? I don't know. There might be a few out there.
And online learning wasn't a thing, right? So this is completely new COVID times.
Right.
So.
Well, we so appreciate everything you're doing and continue to do, and I'm guessing you're going to see some responsiveness from the people watching.
I already have emails.
Oh, wonderful! That's just what we wanted.
So, yeah.
Well, thanks again. I'm going to let you off the hook at this point.
Thank you, Donna.
Thanks everyone for attending. That's still hanging on, and enjoy the rest of your day. Have a wonderful, if not unique, fall semester.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. Take care.
You too.